Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
Welcome to Story by Story, sharing the human experience. I'm Kate Dudding, your host this month. Our other host, who's normally with us, Joe Doolittle, is off gallivanting in Ireland, but I'll bet he'll bring back some stories that you'll hear about later this year. Today we have as a guest one of the first storytellers in the area that I ever heard tell stories. And so I'm very excited to have with us today Mary Murphy from Albany. Welcome, Mary.
Hello, Kate. Nice to be with you.
Why don't we just start at the beginning with how did you start telling stories?
Well, when people ask me that, I kind of go off on a long...
Remember, we only have an hour.
Right, we only have an hour, that's right.
Sort of, do you have a medium version?
Yes, I do. But anyway, I started out liking acting very much. Okay. In fact, I loved the theater, and I spent my whole entire youth very interested in it, and even being an apprentice in a summer stock theater for 2 summers, and going to school and taking acting classes and then getting a degree in drama, and acting wherever I could. And knowing all about the theater and directing, and I loved it all. And I went to New York City and came back up here to live in Albany. And when I did, I wanted a way to continue working as a performer. I guess I wanted to be a professional performer, someone who could maybe make a living or a small or large or medium living from doing the thing I love best. So I looked around and I decided to do a one-person show, and I found the poetry of Shel Silverstein.
Okay.
And I love that poetry, and I know that kids love it too. And I put together a whole show called Fried Fishes Taste Delicious. I was working at St. Rose at the time, and there was a graphic artist there, and he made a picture, a card for me with a frying pan and a fish in it. And that was my show, and that was my performance. And I did it several times, knowing, of course, full well that Shel Silverstein's poems are copyrighted. They're certainly not in the public domain, and trying very hard to get in touch with him and learning about the process of getting in touch with an artist, a writer, and having them tell you yes or no on whether you could do it. But he is very reclusive, or he was. And he never let anybody... He's dead now. Right. He never let anybody do his work. He did his work himself. And that was it. And I found that out not by dealing with anybody directly through him, but more through the publisher and just through librarians and finding out that, it just wasn't feasible. So I never actually, I must say, got paid for Fried Fishes Taste Delicious. So I think we're okay there.
Right. But and you always, of course, acknowledged that those were his poems.
Right, yes. Yeah. The title was mine, and that was it. But I love being in front of the children's audience. It was a lot of fun. It was very exciting. They liked the stories. And I used to wear a green overall that made me look like a gardener, sort of in bright green.
Ms. Green Jeans.
Yeah, sort of probably like this, except maybe a little brighter. And a yellow shirt that said Fried Fishes Taste Delicious, which Olivia, actually, my daughter Olivia is wearing now. But and a little green cap. And I went around like that and told stories in various places at St. Rose for a family audience and in a few schools and libraries. And gradually got away from that, realizing I had to because of the Shel Silverstein poems, and into the world of stories. I mean, I never read stories. I knew no Grimm fairy tales, Hans Christian Andersen, nothing. But I realized that I would have to come up with some new material, and I began to read these stories, realizing that they were in the public domain.
Right.
And there's
because they had been published before 19.
Right. And seeing how nice these tales were, and gradually realizing that some of them, anyway, were meant to be spoken. And I found a book by a guy named Richard Chase, who was a collector of folk tales in the Appalachian Mountains, I believe.
Right.
And one of the stories in his book was called The Haunted House, which is a story I'll do later on. And I just love that story. And the thing Richard Chase said in the front of his book was, no story should ever be told the same way twice. He sort of gave that permission. You know, you don't have to memorize stories. When you tell this story, it's your story. And I really fell in love with that idea, you know, the fact that you could make it your own. And I say that at every performance, at least for children anyway, that this story is now your story and you can go and tell it because it's a folk tale. And so using the stories of Richard Chase, The Haunted House, The Wicked Stepmother, which everybody got very mad at me for telling, so I had to change to Wicked Witch because this one lady said, stepmothers get a bad enough rap as it is.
You know, I read that a lot of the folk tales that were about stepmothers originally were about mothers, and they made them into stepmothers so it wouldn't be quite so the dysfunctional family idea.
Yes, yes, exactly. You know,
You can't please everybody. Witches would
Right.
also get you into trouble in certain other audiences.
That's right. Yes, that's right. So yes, and teachers were kind of down on me for that story, but it's. The Wicked Stepmother is a version of, I think it's the Juniper Tree, which is a famous Grimm fairy tale in which the witch finally gets her due by turning back into a toad frog, which he was originally. So it has a happy ending, but it's very, very, very grim and gross in the middle.
And kids love it.
Yeah, they like it, all right. It's the elder crowd that doesn't. So once I found all those stories were available to me, these folk tales, it was a matter of, I still like the cute rhyming title, so I called it There's Dirt on My Shirt. And I got that same graphic artist to make a dirty shirt on a card for me. And then went about my business, and of course I've been really telling stories ever since. So that's my sort of middle-sized version of that.
Okay. And now, what are your favorite kinds of stories to tell? Because what I first heard you tell was neither Silverstein's poems nor folk tales.
What'd you hear me tell?
I heard you tell personal stories.
Oh, okay, yes. Yes, I don't know. I sort of got into that because I did want to make it, I guess, in a way, kind of more like a monologue, you know, that you would, the thing about being on stage as a storyteller is you still are a performer. You're not really there as Kate Dudding or Mary Murphy. You're there as that persona that you've created that will then go out and tell the stories and look at the audience and be pleased with everybody and gather them all in with your eyes and all the things that you like to do. So in that persona, I tried to write stories for that persona, for that person that looks out at the crowd. And the first one I wrote was, and of course, if you draw on stuff that you actually did and that actually happened to you, as you know, it's a lot easier. It's much easier to tell the truth. Didn't somebody say that at one time?
But then there are pitfalls too.
Yes. So I was on stage in a play, in Macbeth. I was doing a scene from Macbeth. And at one point I said, and solely give sovereign sway and masterdom. That was the line, to give solely sovereign sway and masterdom in this scene. And I was so nervous. It was one of the first scenes in this Shakespeare class I'd ever done. I was very nervous. I got up, and it was really a Lady Macbeth monologue, and I said, give solely sovereign sway and MasterCard. And then I realized what I'd said. And and the teacher, who is known for going ballistic, started laughing, and everybody laughed, and it was okay. But that struck me as a good kernel, anyway, a beginning for a story that I just called the acting class. And from there, that seemed to work for me, although I didn't do it out in public that much. It was just really my first story, my first time. And then I went on and did one called The Recital, because I certainly have had screwy things happen to me in a recital, piano recital. Now, did you ever take any instrument? What
yes,
did you take?
piano.
Oh, you did?
I was taught initially by lovely sister sister whose name, I can't remember her name. She didn't have us do recitals.
Oh,
Sister Joseph. My mother, who was Presbyterian, loved Sister Joseph. And when Sister Joseph was transferred, 4 towns away, we went and visited her once because my mother wanted to see her again.
oh, nice.
But she was replaced by Sister Augustine, who was a little more on the militant nun side of things. And she had recitals. So
yeah.
I think I had participated in 2. Stress-filled.
Yeah, they're scary.
Yes.
I to this day, I can't really play the piano. If anyone is looking at me expecting me to give a performance, that I can't do. But my aunt, Sister Dorothy Flood, who was a sister of St. Joseph, and she was a piano teacher for many, many years. And so she kind of got us all interested. I think I was the only one that actually went on with lessons. And I just had good friends who were, we all stayed together, the piano students, and we had like our own group, and we loved Sister Jerome, who was our teacher. And
Well, Mary, it sounds like you have a whole story about this.
yes, I do.
Why don't you tell us that story?
Okay.
Okay?
All right. This is a story called The Recital. When I was a kid, I used to have to play in piano recitals, which I hated, because I was never any good at playing the piano in front of other people. Besides, things were always happening to me in these piano recitals. For example, the recital I remember the best from 7 long years of piano lessons was the one in which I played a duet with a girl named Robin Franey. Robin Franey was my best friend at the time, and she was also my partner in a duet for 2 pianos, 4 hands, called Let's Have Fun with a Fugue. Now, when I was a kid, I'd never seen that word fugue before. I know now that it's a musical composition in which different parts successively repeat the theme, but at the time I had no idea. And I'd never seen it before. I didn't know how to pronounce it. And when I went home for dinner that night, my brother said to me, "What's the name of your recital piece this year?" And I said, "Let's have fun with a fug you." And he said, "Oh yeah, well, fug you too." But we went on to play it. And well, the afternoon of the recital was a hot Sunday in late June. The auditorium was stuffy, airless, and filled with relatives. Now, one of the neat things about playing a duet in a recital is that you didn't have to memorize your recital piece. You got to bring your sheet music on stage with you. Now, the reason for that is that I believe is that it's when you practice, you and your partner can start together anywhere in the piece with these numbered phrases. So Robin and I were the only ones that were playing a duet in this particular recital, so we were the only ones that got to bring our sheet music on stage with us. So that afternoon, I walked on stage. There were 2 huge grand pianos. And I walked over to the left side, and behind it, on the left side piano, this is stage left, by the way, there was one of those tall, oscillating floor fans, because the auditorium was so hot and stuffy. And it was on, and it was creating a pretty powerful wind when it blew toward the piano, but at the time, I didn't think anything about it. I waited until Robin got to her piano, and then we both sat at exactly the same moment. We opened our sheet music just as we'd rehearsed and readied our hands above the keyboard, and at a nod from Robin, we began to play. The first few measures went beautifully. Unfortunately, when I went to turn my page, that big old fan oscillated back my way and blew my sheet music right off the piano. I just sat there and watched it float into somebody's lap in the front row. I was so scared that my fingers kept on moving over the keys, playing random notes. Kind of like one of those chickens that keeps on running around after it gets its head chopped off. Well, when I pulled myself together, I realized that I would have to get my partner's attention as unobtrusively as possible in full view of a packed auditorium. Because you see, Robin, a model of concentration, had not stopped playing. And she didn't seem to notice that I wasn't playing with her. In fact, she didn't seem to be paying attention to what was going on my side of the stage at all. So I decided to whisper across that huge expanse of grand piano. I said, "Robin, wait a minute. My music blew off the piano." She continued to play. Well, the audience was already laughing when I went to pick up my music from the man whose lap it had blown into. I brought it back, put it on the piano, opened it up, and decided to whisper a little bit louder. I said, Robin, pick it up at measure 23. My music flew off the piano, pick it up at measure 23. Either she couldn't hear me over the noise of that fan, or she was so scared by this time that she couldn't stop playing. Anyway, I panicked, forgot to whisper, and yelled over to her, damn it, Robin, wait a minute. My music blew off the piano. Pick it up at measure 23. The parents were laughing so hard it sounded like some of them were screaming. Robin kept on playing, and I was trying to pretend like I didn't just say, damn it, in front of the whole audience. When who should come out on stage but Sister Jerome, our music teacher. She went right over that big old fan and unplugged it, clapped her hands for silence, which even Robin heard, crossed downstage to the audience and glared at the audience until they stopped laughing, which didn't take long, turned to us and said, you girls start that piece again, no more of your nonsense, and marched off stage again. It all happened so fast. She was like a miraculous vision. Robin was humiliated because Sister Jerome had to come out on stage and yell at us in front of the whole audience. And she blamed me for the whole thing. She gave me the dirtiest look I've ever received, nodded, and we launched once more into Let's Have Fun with a Fug You. Well, when it was all over, we played it perfectly, and the audience gave us the biggest hand of the day. I mean, they really loved it. But Robin was ready to kill me. She went back to her seat, sat down, slumped down, and started to cry. I, who couldn't play the piano anyway, secretly thought it was the best recital I've ever given. It was certainly the most well-received. In fact, Robin's father captured the whole thing on film with his home movie camera. And Robin never even invited me over to see it. Anyway, that was the experience that convinced me that I had a future on the stage. Any stage. As long as it didn't have a piano on it. And that's my recital story.
Yes, one that I remember hearing.
Right. You know, I used to like those titles. The acting class, the recital, because they're sort of bare bones. Now I don't do that sort of thing anymore, but I like that sort of minimalist idea of the title. And then from there you can go anywhere.
But that story, a lot of people could relate to. And, well, anyone who has ever performed at a recital or had to, or had been invited to witness a recital.
Right, right. A lot of times people will tell me of things. Mary Fellows, who's someone we both know and works for the Upper Hudson Library System, after she heard me tell that story, she right away told me about a time when she was, I think she was playing a flute in a recital with other people were playing, and the bottom half of her flute fell off during the recital. And I thought, that's perfect, you know? That's what you really want to happen, is to hear good stories based on the ones you told or inspired by the ones you just told.
Right, right. People remember theirs
Right.
based on yours.
I tell a story called Let Rover Come Over, which is about a dog jumping into a backseat of our car and sitting on a birthday cake. And children respond to that very well by telling me what their pets have done and silly things and catching the ball, and one jumped through a plate glass window, which wasn't all that silly, and another one about how her baby brother came over and had a meatball in his hand from the dinner table and dropped it into the fish bowl and hit the fish on top of the head. And the fish was reeling for a while, but then the other fish came along and ate the meatball. So you always hear good stories if you're listening and you're receptive and you show that you want to hear people's stories. People are dying to tell their stories.
Oh, yes.
No matter what age.
Well, that's what conversations normally are that you have with people. I mean, how many times have you heard about the traffic jam or a family gathering or, you know, something that, you know, the horrible boss.
Right.
People want to, you know, as you said, want to share their stories.
And it's kind of a tradition about stories, too, now. I am doing this memoir project where I'm helping older people to write their stories.
And where is that happening?
And that's through the Upper Hudson Library System, and so we go into different libraries and also into assisted living places. And this woman told me about her husband, the two of them were driving, let's see if I can remember this, home from a wedding. And she had on high heels, you know, and very dressed up. But they stopped at a rest stop, and she didn't want to wear the high heels into the bathroom. She was done with them, so she put them on the seat next to her. on her seat, and put on slippers and went into the restroom to go to the bathroom, and then and her husband went in too, and so she got done first, which is not usually the case, and she's waiting for him and waiting for him. And he's not coming out, and then she thought he was sick, so she poked her head into the men's rooms, called out to him. There was no answer. Where was he? She went out to the car. No car. Apparently, he'd just driven off without her. He was a traveling salesman, and he was used to getting in the car on the throughway. And he just got in the car and he drove off and left her there. And suddenly noticed that instead of his wife, he had a pair of high heels in the seat next to him. He had to get off the highway, go back, get on the highway, and go to the rest stop and pick her up. But the reason why I'm telling this story is that every year somebody brings up remember the time when Daddy left you in the restroom on the highway. But it becomes a story that's a communal story that they all know, and it's a shared family story. And so we, of course, put that into her book.
Right.
As being both funny or amusing, but also as, relating the history of their life together.
Right.
So those are the kinds of stories I love to hear, and I love to be able to inspire them in others.
Yes. Now, I was at a workshop recently with Judith Black, who's a storyteller from Massachusetts, and I think she's one of the Circle of Excellence storytellers at the National Storytelling Network.
She was a Riverway storyteller.
Right. She was here for Riverway a few years ago.
Right.
And she said that that when a storyteller comes up on stage, the audience first relates to the storyteller, and then through the storyteller relates to the story. So she was recommending that, I was working with her on one of my Julia Child stories. She wanted to have me put more of me into the story. That she thought people would be wondering, well, why are you, how did you become interested in Julia Child, and has she changed your life? And so, while I mostly now tell historical stories, I hadn't really thought of that, and that there could be a personal frame or a personal points within a story.
Yeah, I think that's true. You mean a story that's going to be about, because you tell stories about people that really existed not too long ago within people's lifetime, that you're going to tell a story. And I think that the people that you tell about are so interesting and well known that you really don't have to inject a lot of yourself. And you can say, oh, I've always loved the music of Bing Crosby, and now I'm going to, tell you something you may not know about Bing Crosby. I think that does not have to be framed that way.
Right.
If it's something that happened to you and you said, I went to a Bing Crosby concert one time, and there he was up on stage, and then went. That would be different.
Right. And just a month ago, I was working with Elizabeth Ellis, who is another one of the Circle of Excellence storytellers, as judged by the National Storytelling Network, on a story about the Clinton 12. Have you ever heard of them?
No.
No, I haven't found anybody except for Elizabeth Ellis who has heard of them. The Clinton 12 were 12 high school students who were desegregated, the first school that was ordered to be desegregated by court order.
Oh.
And they were in Clinton, Tennessee.
Tennessee, okay. Yes.
And Elizabeth Ellis grew up 100 miles away, which was, at that time, she was 13 years old. So she had heard of them. And it happened a year before Little Rock.
Oh.
And going, why did Little Rock get all the press or the memory? And
well, does she remember anything personally about that time and that day that it happened, or that
she didn't share that? She just kind of gave personal insights that at that time and at that place you did what your parents told you, and you didn't bring shame on your family.
Yes.
So when one of the Clinton 12, it was very hard. It was very, very hard that the jeering crowds that greeted them when they walked into school today kept on growing and growing and growing, and the hallways were horrible in the high school. And so one of the Clinton 12 decided one day he'd had enough and just walked out of school. But his parents talked to him, and the alderman, in fact, came and talked to him, and he went back to school. In fact, Bobby Kane, he was the first one to graduate. Well, when I told this story at a workshop, and then I got Elizabeth Ellis's comments, and then comments from the other people, the other storytellers who were working on stories, and a lot of them said, well, how did you hear about it? And why is it important to you? And so I found a place to, giving the background, and then there was a court order to desegregate. He said, a storytelling friend of mine is from Clinton, Tennessee, and she happened to mention one day that their town was the first town to have a court-ordered desegregated school. And I said, I've never heard about it. And then I got the documentary about it, because there has been a documentary. And I was so fascinated by this story because they interviewed the actual, well, they're now 50 years later, the adults,
right,
who were those sophomores, juniors, and seniors who were doing it. And I always love that personal connection. That I feel honored to tell their stories.
So the people at the workshop, for example, wanted to know why you wanted to tell that story.
Right.
I'm kind of surprised by that, because if it's a good story, and this is a good story, then there should be no question of why you would want to tell it. Just lucky that you hit upon it and found it, and it interested you.
Yes.
So that's a little puzzling to me, but interesting.
Yeah. And I was at another Elizabeth Ellis workshop, and somebody was telling a personal story, and she said, "Oh well, just why don't we take a little time now and let me give you my overview on personal stories? What she considered the key points to address." And then she looked at me because she knew I was going to tell a historical story, and she said, "Well, I'm sorry, Kate, this really doesn't apply to your work." I said, "No, it does apply. My story is a personal story. It's just not my personal story."
Right.
Because I tell all history from the personal perspective, not the facts and the figures and the dates and the exclusively
but the individual
that.
people.
Yes, I can't understand the big picture at all unless I can hear somebody's thoughts and words who experienced it. And then I go, oh, gee.
And it brings it down to a human level.
Right.
And that way, like there's all these people going around impersonating Teddy Roosevelt, right? He's a popular one to do. And becoming that person, interacting with real people, and then suddenly you see the bigger picture from that small picture.
Exactly. But I can never, I hated social studies and history in high schools, and I never took any in college. But biographies I love.
Yeah.
And then I went, oh, that's how I get there.
Yeah.
So, okay. Now you mentioned that you had another story up your sleeve, one of the Richard Chase stories from your second phase of your storytelling career.
I was going to say storied past, but you didn't let me do that. But yes.
Well, so we didn't hear you say storied past.
Right.
No.
Right. This was one of the stories. I figured I'd come today with the idea of telling a story that really was me, a story the way I tell stories, no matter what. And the haunted house seems to be the perfect one. It's supposed to be, according to Richard Chase in his notes that he looked, the oldest haunted house story in America. It's like one of the first ones that probably came over from Europe and was changed in different ways and made into a real, genuine American story. So I'll tell that for you now. Because not only is it the first haunted house story in America, it's the first one I ever told. One time there was a preacher, and he wanted to see if he could banish a ghost from a house in his settlement. This house had been haunted about 10 years, and several people tried to stay there all night because, if you stay all night in a haunted house, it gets rid of that haunting spirit. Well, several people, man, woman, children, families, had tried, but all had been scared out by the ghost around midnight. Well, this preacher was a brave man. He said, yes, I'll do it. And he went on up to that house with his Bible in his hand. He went on in, and you can picture what that haunted house looked like. It was gray, and the windows were broken out, and the door was off the hinges. And actually, when he pushed the door open, it was colder inside than it was outside. But he went in anyway, and he saw a huge fireplace, and there was some kindling and some newspapers, and he had some matches, and so he built himself a fire, found a big log. And pretty soon he had this big fire going in the fireplace, and he moved a chair close to it, and he opened up his Bible, and he started to read. He didn't have any trouble at all, just reading his Bible, until just before midnight, when he heard something in the cellar, going back and forth, and back and forth, and back. And then there's something started to scream and get choked off, and there's a lot of thrashing around and struggling. And finally everything got quiet again. Well, I told you this preacher was a brave man. Anybody else would be out of that house in 2 seconds flat. But he sat right back down, he opened up his Bible, and he started to read again. But he didn't get more than 2 sentences read before he heard that thing starting up the cellar stairs. Step, 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 till it was right outside the cellar door. Well, then that preacher, he did get scared, and he stood up, and he held his Bible out in front of him. The knob turned slowly, and the door opened wide. And that preacher, he said in a quiet voice, "Who are you? What is it you want?" Well, the ghost came right across the room, straight up to him, took hold of his coat lapels. It turned out to be a young woman about 20 years old. She smelled earthy. Her hair was torn and tangled, and the flesh was dropping off her face so he could see bones and part of her teeth. She didn't have no eyeballs, but there was a kind of a blue light way back in her eye sockets. And she had no nose to her face. Well, then she started talking. Sounded like her voice was coming and going with the wind blowing through it. Told him how her friend had killed her for her money and buried her in the cellar. Said if he'd dig up her bones and give her a Christian burial, she could rest. But then she told him not to bury all the bones. She told him to keep the end joint of the little finger of the left hand, just this little piece of bone right here. When he found it, he was to hold on to it till the next church meeting. Put it in the collection plate. And if anybody touched that finger bone who was guilty of the murder, you'd find out. And if you come back here once more, after that, you'll hear my voice at midnight. And I'll tell you where my money is hid, and you can give it to the church. And the ghost sobbed like it was tired and sank right down through the cellar floor. What else could that preacher do? He was terrified by this time, but he knew he had to obey the ghost. He had to do what the ghost told him to do. And so he found an oil lamp with a little bit of oil left in it, and he lit it by the flame from the fireplace. And he held it out just like this. And he started walking down the stairs, down those dark stairs, lighting only just a little patch as he went. And when he got down, he looked around, and he saw bones flung all over the cellar. They were in every corner, and it took him all night, all the rest of the night, to gather up all those bones. It was dawn when he came up those stairs with those bones. And he took them right to the cemetery by the church, and he dug the grave himself. And he put her in the grave, and he prayed over her bones and her grave. But he didn't bury all the bones. He kept the end joint of the little finger, the left hand, just this piece. It took him a long time to find it, but when he did, he held on to it until the next church meeting. And that Sunday, when no one was looking, he put that finger bone in the church collection. And then he went out as usual to give his sermon, and they sang their song, and he sat back. And he looked at everybody in the church. And the collection plate was being passed up and down the aisles. He looked at each person who put his hand in that collection plate. And sure enough, when a certain man put his hand in that collection plate and touched that finger bone, it stuck to his hand. He rubbed and scraped and tore at that bone trying to get it off. He went to screaming like he was going crazy. And then they dragged him up to the front of the church right before the preacher. And he confessed the murder. He was taken off and tried and hung with that finger bone still stuck on his hand. Never did come off. But the preacher did go back to that house one midnight. Didn't see the ghost, but the ghost's voice told him to dig under the hearthrug by the fireplace. He did. He found a big sack full of gold and silver money. And he brought it to the church. And nobody ever heard tell of that ghost anymore. But the print of those bony fingers, when a ghost took hold of his coat lapels, was burnt right into the cloth. And that never did come out either. And that's the story of the haunted house.
We're recording this on a Tuesday morning. Even though the studio is black, I know outside it is sunny, and I'm holding on to that nice warm thought.
Yep. That story has served me so well over the years because you can always have kids that will see each of those images, that haunted house and that ghost with a horrible face and the preacher and the finger bone, the whole thing. And they can tell it back to me, those images, and in effect tell the story. And I've seen it done time and time again, no matter how big the crowd is, they all see something and they all tell that story. It's a wonderful story, and it sort of cemented my way of telling stories, I think, because it was one of the first.
Though it's none of the personal stories that I've heard you tell are quite so gruesome, or have that jump in it.
Right, there's nothing like having a jump tail, and you know that is when you make your voice go lower and lower, or you going for a big surprise. And the more of a surprise you can give, and I always tell my students this, we were talking about teaching storytelling, which is also a lot of fun, and I always tell my students that they should not actually look at the person if they want to scare one particular person until the last second when they scare them.
With a big loud voice.
And they love doing that too. There's a lot of things that kids really like about storytelling.
Yeah. Well, since we've drifted into that, why don't you tell us about that part of your storytelling world? You as a storytelling teacher it's mostly students, right?
Right, yes. Right. Young students, middle schoolers. They're an age that I used to be afraid of. I didn't want to go and have anything to do with middle school at all. I just told stories for elementary school. I could go as young as nursery or pre-K or whatever, but I didn't want to go up into that middle school area because I thought that they would be too cool to listen to stories and to listen to me and teaching them storytelling. Well, I found out that about 10 years ago now, it will be 10 years this coming year, in 2012, that I began a residency at Maple Hill Middle School, and that was through the Riverway Storytelling Festival, actually, and the work of Mary Fellows getting a big grant. So there were 5 of us that went into different school districts, and I was lucky enough to get Maple Hill, a very small school district with
in Castleton.
In Castleton, right, with very, very, very open kids. I don't think I've ever seen a class that wasn't open to storytelling, and it made me realize that no matter what age you are, you're still going to like to hear the stories. You're still going to create the images. And when I had that confidence in me, then I could work with these kids. And in the Maple Hill residency, every 7th grader tells a story, and they tell it for a grade. So to a certain extent, they have to work on that. That gets them started working on it, and then we hope that they love working on it. And some of them are scared to death to get in front of their peers, especially at that age. But when they do, it's such a rush, it's such a good feeling for them that many of them then join CAST, which is Connections After School Storytelling Troupe, which is our little storytelling club. And once they're in the club, they can make up new stories of their own. They can find other folk tales that they like as well. They can stick with the one they had in class. And we form a little troupe that goes to senior citizens and younger kids and parents and family, and sometimes performs at the Riverway Storytelling Festival. So it's a chance that kids find out something about themselves when they hear stories and when they're allowed to tell a story. And when they can tell a story and realize how much they enjoyed being in front of the audience and telling the story, no matter how shy they are, no matter what problems they might have in school. I mean, some of the kids we see are doing very, very poorly in school. But I always, and Chris, my cooperating teacher, Chris Fowler, as much as possible, we try to let them be in the cast if they want to, because it shows them a whole new facet of themselves. And I've seen people grow in confidence. I've seen kids, Chris has seen kids do better in school and look forward to coming back for more stories and realizing something, like some gem that they had no idea. And of course we get the star kind of kids too that are in the play and doing all this and then and cheerleading, and they really can't come to cast because there's no time. That they are also terrific too. But it's those little stories that you find in just about every school and every group of kids that really make the experience for the child and for the adults that work with them. So I love teaching storytelling, and I love seeing the kids perform. I'm also working in another group that you know quite well, Children at the Well, and that is through the Interfaith Story Circle. And those students come from all different schools, which is a little harder again. And they can be anywhere from, let's say, 7th grade straight up through high school. And we do get those kids. We get very, very young kids just starting out. And then we get the seniors that really have a lot of confidence. And they tell stories from their faith tradition. Wisdom tales is how we say it. They should be stories that mean something to the student and that are maybe tell a little bit about the faith, perhaps, or about the strong parts of the faith, and we hear all kinds of wonderful stories from kids in headscarves and kids who are Hindu and Jewish kids and Christian kids, and they all tell to each other and they all learn about each other's faiths. Now, what's your impression of Children at the Well as you've seen it grow over the years?
Well, I consider it one path to world peace. That once you hear somebody else's story, you can no longer hate them. Not that I think any of these kids came with that, but I know I've heard one of the girls say once that she had never met anyone who was, and I can't remember what, she was Christian, and she hadn't ever met anyone who was Hindu or Muslim or, and now she has. And to me, when I was attending the Interfaith Story Circle, which is mostly for adults, I had never met any Muslims. And I don't know if you were there at that circle. It happened at the mosque in Colonie. And Gert Johnson, who leads the Interfaith Story Circle, had tried to avoid the evening prayer. I mean, I knew that Muslims prayed 5 times a day. And so they were trying to set the meeting to avoid it. But this was the April meeting, and they forgot about the time change. And the where you pray 5 times a day works on sun time, not on clock time. So didn't the evening prayers follow bang in the middle of that? So, of course, they had to go pray, and we understood that. But they said, if you would like to observe, please come up to our sanctuary and sit in the back, and you're welcome. So I thought, well, why not? So I went up, and now I had always thought, I was brought up Catholic, and I always assumed, this 5 times a day was a quick kind of thing, the equivalent of say 3 Hail Marys and make a good act of contrition, which for those of you who are not brought up Catholic is about a minute and a half maybe. but it wasn't a minute and a half. It seemed like it was maybe 10 minutes. And I had this epiphany. They're going, if they pray 5 times a day and they take approximately 10 minutes each, gee, those Muslim that we hear about in the news, they can't be practicing their religion. Who could pray 5 times a day with that duration and then go out and want to kill people? And it was like, boing. They must be the fringe group that we hear about. And these wonderful people, they must be the bulk of the people who are in the Muslim faith.
I think one reason why Children at the Well works so well as it does is that people have to listen to each other on a deeper level. Even the kids that are listening to the haunted house are listening on a deeper level to the stories. We always talk about the fact that if you're just giving instructions or giving an introduction, kids in general are just so antsy and moving around, and you can't stand it. And then once you start telling the story, there's that silence that develops, that quiet that comes over the people. And there's even been the times when you feel like, I've read about this too, that they're breathing at the same time, these kids, because they're so involved in this communal activity. So when Children at the Well comes along, and we don't just get a lecture about somebody else's religion or practices, but we hear a story related to that person's own experience or own folktale background or the stories that they've been telling all their lives, then you begin listening and you begin realizing that this is a world that you can enter and be in full communion with. You can get to know these people on the level of friendship and performers and audience members. All those different levels.
Yes. One of the things I love about attending the performance each year is watching how the students glom together before the performance and an intermission and afterwards. And I heard one of them say once, there isn't an in crowd, and just, I was new this year and I was a member, I was there, and poof, there I was, part of he didn't use the word team, but that's what I felt.
Right. And I think that storytelling works its magic there, too. The kids that really need storytelling, the kids that need something else in their lives, they get it by coming to Children at the Well. And then, of course, we're the beneficiaries, too.
Right. Oh, yes, their stories and just seeing them. This year there was one, the littlest one, told a story that had an echo in it, and he did that part so well. And the church had a balcony, so he was kind of physically dwarfed. And so when he was talking about being in this valley that had an echo, I got this huge vision of it, and it was just splendid. And
yes, those kids keep on getting better too as they get into these audiences. They relax and they do what they came for. They have that professional gloss to them that comes from really working together, I guess, and really loving storytelling.
And having picked a story that they love.
Right.
That was rule number 1 that I learned. Only tell stories that you love. If you're telling a story that somebody else wants, your audience is going to know it's not.
Or that somebody else told you to tell.
Right.
Right, because I think at first, one of our things, the very first year that we did Children at the Well was that we were trying to steer kids to different stories, and we copied a million stories and we had them. Now this is from the Hindu tradition. You're probably going to get something out of this. And there was a lot of resistance, and they went their own way. And they also went their own way as far as people. The first year was very difficult to pull everybody together from different schools, and we were a little despairing at the end, and they seemed to come forth at the end with this wonderful performance that we didn't know was there. But I think once we let them be themselves, the next year we started with a pizza party, and everybody could talk, and then people began bringing in their stories the very first day and having them. And then that community, that tightness began to develop.
So they've just finished the 6th year, as I recall.
Yes.
And there is a website, childrenatthewell.org.
Was that website done by you?
Yes, yes, I am the volunteer webmaster.
I thought so. I thought
that. My first career was as a computer programmer, and there aren't a lot of storytelling computer programmers, so I like to offer my services to organizations that I believe in and that need my help.
Good for you.
So,
That's great.
So yes, yeah, a geek. You know, I am actually a certified geek. I have a master's degree in computer science.
You can whip out your card if I ask you.
Well, yes.
Your membership card.
That somebody was appalled once when I said that I was a geek. I said, yes, I worked 5 years to get a master's degree. One course at a time. I had a kid in the middle of it, but
Right.
kept on going. Anyways, I would like to tell you a story.
Okay.
And you also, that a lot of my historical stories are the 20, 30-minute version. And in fact, when we did a program together on women, spunky women, I can't remember what our title exactly was,
No.
with Glenn Sanders. That was the first time I told the long version. And now I thought I'd see if I could just identify the heart of the story and if I could make a story out of that. Just so I would have a short version as well as a long version. So, Betty Friedan ended her book, The Feminine Mystique, with the phrase, "A woman has the power to choose." The feminine mystique was a feeling that Betty Friedan and really everyone in the United States was feeling in the 50s and the 60s, that a woman should be satisfied with the two roles of wife and mother. And that should be sufficient for all women. And Betty, when she kept on encountering this, Betty, as then a magazine writer, a graduate of Smith College, was appalled. So she looked into it for 5 years. She did research, and her conclusion to the book was that a woman has the power to choose to do something else if she wanted to. Well, when she went places and talked about her book, it was published in 1963. It was on the New York Times bestseller list. It only fell off because her publisher was totally astounded that it was a bestseller, and they couldn't keep up with the demand. And so when the books weren't available in the bookstores, naturally the sales fell off, and then the books came back and it went back up. She sold 3 million copies in the first 3 years. And when she was making presentations, people would come up to her, just like you were saying, people came up after you tell stories, people would come up to her and say over and over again, "Your book changed my life. I thought I was the only one who felt out of place." Now, her personal life then, well, it had been totally transformed by the book. She was a wife and a mother. She and her husband had 3 children. Her husband was a stage manager and so didn't have a steady job. And Betty, who had been brought up rather conventionally, always felt uncomfortable when she was making more money than her husband. Well, once her book was published, she was making a tremendous amount of money. In fact, they had enough money to buy an apartment in the Dakota Building on Central Park West in New York City. The Dakota Building where John Lennon lived and lots of other celebrities live. And they bought a summer home on Fire Island, which is off of Long Island. So it looked like this was wonderful. But that was only the public side of her life. The private side, her husband started beating her up. Another feminist activist, a friend of hers, later wrote, "It was common knowledge that if you were appearing with Betty Friedan on TV in those days, you had to show up early to help her with her makeup to hide her black eyes." At least once, her husband tried to push her out of a moving car. Luckily, a friend was driving by and saw what was going on and got it stopped and got Betty into his car, the friend's car, and drove her off. This friend happened to be a divorce lawyer and said, "Betty, when are you going to get a divorce? A divorce will stop all this." And she said, "I can't get a divorce. Smith graduates don't get divorced. I don't know anyone who's divorced." "Betty, you could have been killed." "I can't get a divorce." Betty stayed with her husband for 6 years after he started beating her up. I felt so sorry when I read that in her memoir, My Life So Far, that Betty could do so much for women in general and had a hard time fighting for herself. She decided after 6 years to finally divorce her husband because she was afraid the scar tissue around her eyes was going to become permanent. Some choices are hard to make. So that's the heart of that opus that you had heard several years ago.
Yes, I remember. I recognized it.
Yes, that in the bigger version, I go into her background and how it was very, as I said, very conventionally brought up, and since she went to Smith, she had, the choices she had were teacher, librarian, and then working for a researcher for magazines and newspapers in New York City until she got married. That's what was expected.
You know, I don't know how much time we have left. And
we have 3 minutes.
Well, it brings up an interesting point when we do personal stories. Now, when I do personal stories, I hone or polish or work with every sentence so that, and I try for a certain kind of effect. Mm-hmm. So when I get up to tell it, I want to tell it exactly as it was written. Mm-hmm. Every word, I want to memorize it. And so sometimes I have a 5 or 6 page story that I need to memorize. And it makes it very, very hard for me. And I was just thinking that when you were able to take your small section out of your larger section, I would be hard pressed to do that. It would have to become almost like a new story for me because I memorize it because I want to get that. I suppose that's sort of the stand-up comedian in me or something. I need to get to the punchline in a certain way. And I don't think that that is your way of writing personal stories.
Or any kind of stories. That the first workshop that I took at the now defunct Hudson Valley Storytelling Festival, I think it was what it was called, that the story crafters and other people organized. The workshop that I took, the fellow said, you don't have to memorize, that you're describing scene after scene for your audience, and you need to become familiar enough with the scene that you can describe it to them. And if you forget something, you just add it in. And for some audiences, you might have to add in an extra card, like if you're telling a personal story about Uncle Charlie to your family, well, they know Uncle Charlie. But to an audience, you have to give a little background. So I always had, from the very beginning, memorization wasn't necessary.
Yeah.
The bones of the story or the outline. So.
I do my stories as though I would publish them the next day. That's it.
Well, that also was from your dramatic background, that you had a script.
Right, and I had to create an effect. So that's interesting.
Yes. So, well, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Today, Mary
I enjoyed
Murphy.
it. I enjoyed it. Time went by fast, I have to say.
Yes,
I hope it did for the viewers as well.
Yes, and we hope that you'll come back next month and see our guest then. We'll be having Alan McClintock, another member of the Riverway Storytelling Festival family. Thank you very much for joining us in Story by Story.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning